Military coups are still a regular occurrence in some parts of the African continent decades after independence, with experts saying the African continent has seen over 200 military takeovers between the 1960s and 2012. Recently, the Presidential Guard in Niger led a coup to topple President Mohamed Bazoum, and you'll remember that fighting still rages on in some other parts of the continent, including Ethiopia as well as Sudan. The most vulnerable, being women and children, have been displaced among millions others. We take a look at the sustainability of this, especially on the back of the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the African Union's Agenda 2063. For that conversation, we speak to senior futurist at the Institute for Futures Research, Dr. Njeri Mwagiru. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's just get a brief introduction for our viewers. So when we speak of a futurist, what are we speaking about?
When we speak of a futurist, Dudu, we are speaking to our professional or an academic with a future studies qualification that spends their time scanning the horizon, tracking trends and emerging trends, current and emerging trends, to get a sense of what might be coming around the corner. So we refer to it as developing anticipatory intelligence, or ensuring that we are better prepared for disruptions and surprises. A futurist engages with long-term possibilities and aims to enhance decision-making in this regard.
What are we anticipating? Because we know what we're currently faced with when it comes to some of the disruptions or insecurity in some parts of the continent. Women and children find themselves at the receiving end of all of this. And so what does the future of this here continent look like?
Well, specifically with regards to the ongoing military destabilizations and coups across various African countries and looking towards long-term peace building, in terms of building sustainable futures, the inclusion of gender equity issues as well as the inclusion of youth in some of the decision-making and policies towards resolving these ongoing conflicts and issues of instability is a critical factor. Not only because these groups tend to be the more vulnerable populations when it comes to conflict contexts, but also data is showing that the inclusion of women and youth in peace-building efforts towards signatories of peace accords contributes to ensuring better long-term futures of democracy and stability for various contexts and countries.
If we take a look at where we are as a continent in light of the insecurity that is plaguing the continent, is it safe to say that currently we are in Africa dystopia?
That would be one view that we could definitely take. The data indicates that there is a resurgence of levels of insecurity, but there are also a number of critical factors that contribute to this unstable context, including low development indices, especially across the Sahel region, where we're seeing the emergence of these military coups, low gender equality as well, and continuing legacies of imperialism and continued efforts towards establishing long-lasting democracies in these countries.
And so, how do we get to Africa utopia?
How do we get to Africa utopia? I think a key aspect of that will be obviously in terms of leadership and governance. We need to ensure that we are addressing some of the critical issues that create these contexts of instability, but that also can contribute to long-term peace building. The Africa Gender Report 2023 addresses the issue of unconstitutional changes of government and highlights some key topics that are important to address, including the integrity of elections, and this includes ensuring gender equity legislation as part of these processes. Addressing issues of diversity, inclusion, and human rights protections, ensuring constitutional and state order and legitimacy, and economic growth and public sector accountability. And with economic growth, to ensure that women entrepreneurs, women as a key contributor to workforces and the labor forces are included, as well as the youth. We know that in terms of African youth demographics, the youth are the largest population segment currently. So the inclusion in decision-making towards establishing better futures for Africa, utopian futures for Africa, is critical.
Yeah. To get there, perhaps let's address one of the important factors that you mentioned, taking a look at unconstitutional changes of governments, and that not necessarily being a good thing. So when you take a look at a country like Niger or a country like Mali, for instance, where people were actually celebrating the fact that the military has taken over, how should we understand that? Because you speak to some pundits and they'll tell you that, well, there was never good governance to start with.
Exactly, Dudu, which is why good governance is such a critical issue to address when we look at unconstitutional changes of government, but also developing long-term peace-building solutions. And if we take it back to the issue of gender equity, research is showing that these contexts where gender equity is low, and the African Development Bank has a gender index that looks at dimensions of gender equality, including political representation, economic involvement, and these indices are particularly low in these contexts. I think it's important to consider the systemic intersection of various critical matters to address, governance being one of them, inclusion of women and gender equity as a key component of governance also being the other. And in terms of the commentary from some pundits around the popular reception of some of these junta governments, it speaks to the issue of needing to ensure legitimacy of your state institutions. And this is also a critical aspect of government. That legitimacy is clearly lacking in situations where populations will celebrate the coup and the junta government as we're seeing in some of these countries.
Because when we speak of sustainability, when you have women and children being displaced and some of the children having trauma implanted in them at a very young age, you ask yourself then, this utopia that we are looking at, what will characterize it when the children of tomorrow are experiencing so much trauma today?
Absolutely. It's so important for us to ensure we are implementing long-term solutions, comprehensive long-term solutions to address these issues of instability. So good governance is one of them, but also institutionalizing public sector accountability of services, including trauma counseling, but also ensuring access to education, job opportunities, addressing issues of food insecurity and malnutrition. So ensuring the general health and well-being of your population as a comprehensive aspect of conflict resolution and peace building is important. And centering youth and women as decision makers, as contributors, especially local women and youth in these contexts, is very important. So we can show we're targeting our responses to their particular needs and ensuring that we're centering ownership of these processes at a local level for these communities.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Senior Futurist at the Institute for Futures Research, Dr. Njeri Mwagiru.